At a family gathering, I found myself at the table, my arm encased in a cast. I was unable to even grasp a fork, leaving me to endure the meal in hunger. The atmosphere among the guests was one of quiet apprehension. My daughter then calmly remarked, "My husband taught her a lesson." My son-in-law then loudly boasted. An elderly woman believed she held dominion, but I demonstrated otherwise. I simply offered a serene smile. 10 minutes later, the doorbell chimed. Upon opening the door, my son-in-law was confronted by someone who truly held authority. Friends, before we embark on this narrative, allow me to make a small request. If the words you are about to hear touch your heart, I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and bestow upon it a like. Furthermore, in the comments section, please share the city or state from which you are tuning in. It brings me immense joy to witness the vastness of our community. Now please enjoy the story. The rich, savory scent of roast duck with apples, dense and luscious, permeated the air like a comforting embrace. For anyone else, this aroma would have signaled an occasion for merriment, a symbol of warmth and familial bonds. However, for me, seated at the place of honor in my own dining room, it served only as a stark reminder of my incapacitation. My gaze was fixed upon my plate, a piece of exquisite bone-white china, delicate in its design and edged with gold, part of a set my late husband and I had acquired in the French Quarter 40 years prior. The plate remained utterly devoid of sustenance, pristine and empty. To my right, where my right hand should have been, lay a bulky, cumbersome plaster cast. It felt cold and foreign, a dead weight tethered to my limb. A dull ache throbbed beneath the cast, a persistent pulse that sent waves of discomfort through my forearm, extending all the way to my shoulder. My radius bone was fractured, with significant displacement. I had sensed it even before the X-rays confirmed it, having heard that jarring, sickening snap, like a dry twig breaking, when Tavarius forcefully propelled me against the doorframe. "Come on, everyone," boomed Tavarius's voice, laced with an air of entitlement, its loudness overwhelming the gentle clinking of silverware. "Don't be reserved. The duck today is simply divine. Havisha has truly outdone herself." Tavarius occupied my husband's customary seat, the imposing chair upholstered in deep velvet. He had unbuttoned his charcoal grey suit jacket, his face already gleaming from the room's warmth and the alcohol he had consumed. He wielded his knife and fork with a rather savage enthusiasm, carving off prodigious portions of the meat and conveying them to his mouth with minimal mastication. Grease trickled down his chin, which he carelessly wiped away with the back of his hand. Seated around the table were his guests, comprising 2 gentlemen and a lady, one of his associates from City Hall. They dined in silence, their attention fixed on their plates. They were acutely aware of the palpable tension in the air, as thick and suffocating as the humidity preceding a thunderstorm. They observed me, a woman of color with prematurely gray hair, my posture erect despite the cast on my arm, sitting there without a morsel of food, yet their fear of him was palpable. Tavarius was their superior, a minor potentate whose decisions dictated their financial incentives and vacation approvals. I attempted to flex the fingers of my left hand. They responded, but I was unable to reach the heavy platter of duck positioned at the center of the table. It lay just beyond my grasp, and my functional side lacked the reach. To request assistance would be to admit defeat. Tavarius, one of the guests, a young man with spectacles, ventured tentatively, Perhaps we should offer Ms. Upilia some." "Stay out of it, Marcus," Tavarius interjected curtly, pouring himself another measure of expensive cognac. The bottle made a delicate clinking sound against the crystal glass. "Ms. Oilia is observing a dietary restriction today. Therapeutic fasting is remarkably beneficial for mental clarity. Wouldn't you agree, Mama? His eyes, clouded by liquor, met mine. There was no hint of regret in his gaze, only an overwhelming sense of triumph, the sort a predator experiences upon finally cornering its prey and relishing its vulnerability. Mama brought it upon herself, Jivisha chimed in. My daughter was seated to her husband's left, attired in a beige dress that did little to flatter her complexion, rendering her appearance washed out and fatigued. Javisha meticulously sliced a cucumber into minuscule rounds, her gaze deliberately avoiding mine. She's reaching an advanced age, Tavarius continued, addressing his guest as if recounting an amusing anecdote in a barber shop. Her coordination isn't what it used to be. Her legs get tangled. She attempted to ascend to the attic yesterday. Can you imagine? I asked her. Where are you off to, old woman? But she wouldn't heed my words, and down she tumbled. Fortunately, she didn't fracture her neck. He let out a laugh, and the guests forced out strained, polite smiles. I turned my attention to my daughter. For 3 decades, I had dedicated myself to healing people, to understanding the intricacies of the human brain. I knew where memories resided, where speech originated, and where fear held its domain. Yet I was unable to pinpoint the moment in my recollection when I had lost my daughter, when she had transformed into this mere shadow, this hollow echo of her contemptible husband. It was an accident, Havisha stated softly, finally meeting my eyes, which swam with apprehension. Her fear was not for me, but for herself. But it was a necessary lesson. Mama, you must learn to defer to the head of the household. You are no longer in a position of authority. You do not issue commands here. My stomach clenched with a pang of intense hunger. I had abstained from food for nearly 24 hours, ever since Tavarius, in his demand for the condominium's deed, had violently shoved me against the hallway wall. The ache in my broken bones pulsed in rhythm with the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Tick-tock, tick-tock. That clock had belonged to my father. It had always maintained perfect time. Tavarius raised his glass. To discipline, he proclaimed, a household requires order and a clear hierarchy. The provider dictates the terms, and those who subsist on charity remain silent and unobtrusive. He downed the cognac in a single gulp, emitted a grunt, and impaled a pickled mushroom with his fork. A profound shift occurred within me, deep beneath my ribs, transforming resentment into a cold, hard ice. It was a sensation I knew well, that same icy detachment that would descend upon me as I entered the operating room, upon hearing the anesthesiologist confirm, "Patient is ready." I would then take the scalpel in my hand. Emotions are merely distractions. Anger introduces tremors, and I required a steady hand. I did not weep. Tears are for those who seek solace. I sought nothing, I knew. My gaze drifted to the clock face. The hands moved forward relentlessly. 7:59 in the evening. Silence enveloped the room, punctuated only by Tavarius's chewing. He exuded an air of victory, convinced he had shattered my spirit as effectively as my bone. He perceived the cast as a symbol of my utter defeat. I straightened my back as much as the pain would permit and drew a deep breath. "Tavarius," my voice emerged, quiet yet distinct, slicing through the heavy atmosphere of the dining room like a surgical instrument. Tavarius froze, his fork nearing his lips. The guests ceased their chewing. Even Havisha fell silent. "What do you want?" he grumbled without turning. "You are occupying my husband's chair," I stated, my eyes fixed on the back of his head. "And according to my calculations, you have precisely 1 minute left to enjoy it." Tarius slowly turned, his face flushed, his lips contorting into a sneer. "Excuse me," he inquired, a menacing tone creeping into his voice. Are you threatening me, old hag, or what? Are you going to strike me with your cast? He erupted in laughter, his coarse, barking guffaws echoing off the high ceiling. Oh, I'm so terrified, I'm trembling, he mocked, turning to his guests. Look, everyone, she's timing me. Go ahead, count. 59 seconds, 58. I offered no reply. I simply observed the second hand's quivering trajectory as it approached the vertical mark. I possessed knowledge he lacked. I understood that the mechanisms I had set in motion were functioning with the same precision as that clock. Tavarius was unaware that the silence in this apartment was not an admission of defeat, but a countdown. The second hand completed its final sweep, and precisely as it touched the 12, a surge of pain shot through my arm, seemingly transporting me back in time, exactly 24 hours earlier. That evening, the air in the apartment was not perfumed with roast duck, but reeked of stale liquor and the sour stench of fear. Tavarius was pacing the living room, stumbling into furniture. He appeared like a cornered rodent, sweating profusely, his eyes darting nervously, his hands trembling. I need the money, you old witch, he screamed, spitting as he spoke. Do you comprehend the extent of my debt? These are not trifles, these are serious individuals. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, blocking his path. This is my husband's apartment, I replied calmly, and as long as I draw breath, it will not be sold to settle your gambling indiscretions. That was a miscalculation, not the refusal itself. No, the error lay in assuming I was still dealing with a human being. In that instant, the humanity within Tavarius succumbed entirely to the primal terror of his creditors. He lunged at me. I saw his dilated pupils, the whites of his eyes bloodshot. The shove was sudden and unexpectedly forceful for a man of his physique. He didn't merely push me, he transferred his entire weight into the action, sending me flying like a discarded rag doll. I was hurled backward. My right hand instinctively shot up to shield my face from impact with the doorframe. Crack. I would recognize that sound anywhere, even amidst 1,000 others, the dry, sickening snap of a bone fracturing. In that fleeting moment, my world contracted to a single focal point in my forearm. A searing wave of nausea washed over me. I slid down the wall onto the hardwood floor, cradling my unnaturally angled wrist against my chest. Jivisha stood in the hallway. She witnessed the entire incident. She saw him wind up, saw the shove, heard the crack. Yet she did not rush to my aid. She merely pressed her hands to her cheeks and whispered, "Mama, why did you have to provoke him? Just sign the papers." Tarius, breathing heavily, loomed over me. "See?" he wheezed. "It's your own fault. You tripped, you foolish old woman." He darted to the landline phone on the nightstand and ripped the cord from the wall. Then he snatched my cell phone from my robe pocket. "No calls," he growled. "Sit here and contemplate. The notary is arriving tomorrow. If you don't sign willingly, I'll have you committed. I'll declare you senile and violent. I have connections everywhere. You know that." He slammed the bedroom door shut and turned the key in the lock. I was left alone in the darkness on the floor, my arm ablaze with pain. However, Tavarius, despite his perceived cleverness, was merely a petty functionary. He understood how to siphon funds from sidewalk repair budgets, but he had no comprehension of my generation, and he had undoubtedly forgotten who I was before I became a frail, elderly woman. I am a physician. Panic is a luxury a surgeon cannot afford. Battling through the pain that threatened to black out my vision, I crawled towards the antique wardrobe. With my left hand, I fumbled along the bottom shelf for a worn leather satchel, my emergency kit. It hadn't contained scalpels for years, but it held items that could offer salvation in other ways. A vial of painkillers, a syringe, and an old burner phone that I habitually recharged once a month out of sheer habit. I administered the injection to myself. With trembling fingers, I inserted the battery into the phone, the screen illuminated with a dim greenish glow. Signal acquired. Whom to call? 911. Useless. The captain of the local precinct frequented the sports bar with Tavarius every Sunday. They were bound by a symbiotic cycle of minor corruption. My call would undoubtedly be intercepted, and Tavarius would escalate his aggression. I required someone positioned above this mire, someone for whom the regulations of this district held no sway. I closed my eyes. My memory helpfully supplied a sequence of digits I hadn't dialed in precisely 20 years. Numbers like this are not written down. They are committed to memory. Ring, second ring, third. A man's voice responded. Calm, deep, authoritative. A voice unaccustomed to repetition. It's Oilia, I stated, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from disbelief. I require assistance. A silence hung on the other end of the line. It lasted only a second, yet decades seemed to transpire within it. Location? He inquired. No. How are you? No. Long time no see. Only an immediate readiness for action, akin to a soldier's reflexes. I provided the address. Stand by. A sharp ring at the door jolted me from my reverie, yanking me back to the stifling dining room. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times. The sound of the doorbell was unlike its usual melodic tone. It was a prolonged, insistent, demanding signal that caused the glass in the china cabinet to rattle. Tavarius flinched, then broke into a smug grin. He wiped his greasy lips with a napkin and, swaying slightly, rose to his feet. Well, look at that, he proclaimed triumphantly to the silent guests. And you were worried. Punctuality, the hallmark of sophistication. Yes, Ms. Oilia. He glanced down at me, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of easy financial gain. That's the notary, he explained to the guests, with a wink. I specifically summoned him for 8 o'clock. We'll quickly sign one small document, a mere formality, you understand. Family matters, and then we shall resume the banquet. Havitia exhaled in relief and reached for her wineglass. Thank God, she whispered. Mama, please, just sign it. Don't make a scene. I remained silent, tightening my grip on the armrest of the chair with my left hand. The painkillers I had taken the previous day had long since worn off, but now adrenaline obliterated all sensation. Tavarius, stumbling and humming an indistinct tune, made his way into the foyer. I heard his heavy footsteps moving down the hall. I heard the lock click. Come in, my friend. His voice boomed, filled with disingenuous hospitality. We've been anticipating your arrival. I trust the documents are prepared. Our elderly lady is being somewhat recalcitrant, but we... Tavarius's voice abruptly ceased, not faded, but cut off as if his oxygen supply had been severed. The dining room fell into complete silence. The guests exchanged glances. Javisha froze, her glass suspended near her lips. I watched the vacant doorway leading to the hall. I understood what was about to unfold. Tavarius believed he was opening the door to an accomplice, a negligible clerk who would legalize theft for a modest sum. He was so assured of his immunity, of his insignificant power over a senile old woman. But he had opened the door to the wrong individual. He had not opened it to a notary. He had opened it to his reckoning. Instead of a greeting, a profound silence permeated the hallway. It was so dense it felt as though the air had been entirely evacuated from the apartment. And then I heard a sound that caused my heart to quicken its pace, the heavy, measured cadence of combat boots on hardwood. These were not the shuffling steps of a legal representative. This was the stride of authority. I could not see the events transpiring at the front door, but I heard Tavarius's breathing falter, devolving into a rasping wheeze. Governor Thorne! My son-in-law's voice, which had been resonating with authority moments before, now sounded thin and pathetic, like a schoolboy caught smoking. Governor, sir. A paralysis descended upon the table. The guests remained frozen, forks poised in midair. The woman from City Hall dropped a morsel of duck onto the tablecloth, but she remained oblivious. The name Tavarius had uttered was too grand for our dining room. This was the name of a man whose portraits adorned their offices, a man whose decisions shaped the destiny of the entire state with a single stroke of his pen. What an unexpected honor! Tarius stammered from the hallway. I heard him retreating. We were not prepared. Had I known you were gracing us with your presence. It's merely a family gathering, Governor Thorne. Two figures emerged in the dining room doorway. These were not guests, but imposing presences. Two massive men clad in tactical gear. No insignia was visible, but their posture was undeniable. A security detail. They silently took positions on either side of the entrance, their gazes scanning the room with an unsettling indifference. Tavarius backed into the room, bowing subserviently to someone unseen in the hall. His face had taken on the pallor of curdled milk. Please, please, do come in, he fussed, nearly colliding with chairs. Havisha, stand up. Guests rise, the governor himself. And then he entered. Cassius Thorne had aged considerably in those 2 decades. His hair had turned completely silver, and the lines etched around his eyes were deeper, scars left by time and the weight of responsibility. But his eyes remained the same, steely, intelligent, capable of piercing one's very soul. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that fit him as if it were armor, emphasizing the broad shoulders of a former military man. Yet, the most striking detail was not his appearance, but what he held in his hands. In his massive palms, accustomed to wielding weapons and signing executive orders, he carefully clutched a small, unassuming bouquet of wild blue hydrangeas, brilliant blue blossoms against the stern grey fabric. Tavarius, trembling uncontrollably, attempted to intercept him, extending a clammy hand for a handshake. Governor Thorne, allow me. I am Tavarius, Deputy Director of Housing. Sir. The governor moved past him without breaking stride, as if Tavarius were an inanimate object, a coat rack or empty space. Tavarius was left standing with his hand outstretched, gasping for air like a beached fish. Cassius's gaze was fixed intently on me. He walked directly towards my place at the head of the table, disregarding Havisha, who was frozen in terror, and the petrified guests. The only sounds in the room were his measured breathing and the creaking of the floorboards beneath his weight. He approached the table and halted. His eyes first scanned the lavish spread, the roast duck, the salads, the array of liquors, then drifted to my plate, its pristine whiteness. Slowly, deliberately, his gaze shifted to my right arm, to the rough, hastily applied cast from which my swollen, bruised fingers protruded. I observed his jaw clench so tightly that a muscle visibly twitched in his cheek. The colour drained from his face, rendering it eerily still. This was not mere anger, it was a terrifying, controlled rage, akin to a tsunami poised to unleash its fury. The room was so quiet I could distinctly hear my father's clock ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Governor Cassius Thorne, the undisputed master of the state, a man who commanded respect from oligarchs and criminals alike, performed an act that utterly astonished everyone present. He knelt down on one knee, directly onto the hardwood floor beside my chair. His expensive suit touched the floor, but he paid it no mind. He was now level with my face. He placed the bouquet of hydrangeas on the table, beside my empty plate, and then, with a tenderness that suggested a fear of causing harm even with his touch, he covered my good hand with his warm, broad palm. His eyes, usually cold and piercing, now conveyed a depth of pain and tenderness that rendered me breathless. He paid no attention to anyone else, not to Tavarius, leaning against the wall for support, not to Yisha, shrinking into herself, not to the guests. In that moment, only I existed in his perception. "Miss Oilia," he said softly, his deep baritone causing the crystal on the table to tremble. He looked at my empty plate, then back into my eyes. "You mentioned you had fallen," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper that carried more implicit threat to everyone in the room than any shouted command. "But you neglected to inform me that you were starving." Cassius slowly rose from his knee. He did not await my response. He needed no words to comprehend the obvious. The tremor in my fingers, the pallor of my lips. That humiliating, gnawing hunger that was impossible to conceal. He turned to face the table. His movements were fluid, yet imbued with a gravitas that constricted throats. He approached the high-backed chair at the head of the table, the very seat Tavarius had been lounging in moments before, and placed his hand on its backrest. He did not even glance at my son-in-law, he simply stood there, waiting. Tavarius, stumbling backward as if burned by scalding water, relinquished the seat with such haste that he nearly toppled Havish's chair. Pure animal terror was etched across his features. He had been unceremoniously dethroned from a position he believed was rightfully his by brute force. Without uttering a single word, the governor sat down. The chair did not creak under his weight. He occupied that space with such natural ease as if he had been seated there his entire life. He picked up a linen napkin, unfolded it, and neatly spread it across his lap. Then his eyes fell upon the utensils Tavarius had carelessly strewn across the tablecloth. Greasy and soiled, Cassius, with a flick of his pinky finger, pushed them aside in evident disgust. A shadow detached itself from the periphery, and a security officer materialized, presenting a pristine dining set to the governor. It had been concealed within his tactical vest, a travel-sized ensemble, yet fashioned from polished steel. The room was engulfed in an unnerving stillness. Tavarius's guests were hunched into themselves, striving for anonymity. They comprehended the gravity of the situation. This moment was a spectacle best expunged from memory if they wished to safeguard their professional standing. Cassius reached for the duck entree with an effortless motion. With a single hand, he drew the substantial platter closer, then picked up the carving knife. I observed his hands. 30 years prior, those same hands belonged to a terrified sergeant, brought to me with shrapnel lodged in his parietal lobe. Back then, they trembled uncontrollably. Now they were as firm as solid rock. He carved a portion of the meat, not tearing it as Tavarius had, but rather separating the fibers with the precision of a surgeon. Subsequently, he began to portion it into minuscule, immaculate segments. A cut, another precise incision. He was preparing the meal as one would for very young children or those recuperating from severe illness. No one dared utter a sound. Tavarius stood behind the governor, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, beads of perspiration coursing down his temples and saturating his collar. Javicia sat, her face ashen, fiddling with the edge of the tablecloth. Cassius completed his meticulous preparation. He skewered the most succulent piece of duck onto his fork, then turned to face me. There was no trace of condescending pity in his gaze. Instead, I detected profound, almost filial reverence. He brought the fork to my lips. "Please, Miss Oilia," he murmured, his voice soft. My cheeks flushed, mortified at the prospect of being hand-fed in the presence of individuals who mere hours ago had mocked my vulnerability. It should have felt profoundly humiliating, yet the sheer dignity inherent in Cassius's action quelled any nascent sense of shame. I opened my mouth and accepted the offering. The rich flavor of the roasted duck, Its savoury fat and the sweet counterpoint of apples flooded my senses. My stomach contracted with a surge of heartfelt appreciation. I chewed and swallowed, a comforting warmth radiating through my body, restoring my lost vitality. Cases waited with unwavering patience. He offered me another morsel, then another. Only after I had satisfied the initial, pressing pangs of hunger did he set down the fork. He meticulously wiped his hands with his napkin and, without turning, addressed the hushed assembly. A single word, yet it resonated like the strike of a gavel. "Who among those present?" the governor inquired, his tone remarkably even, almost as if discussing the day's weather. "Is the author of the lesson, Mizzy, Oilia received?" Tavarius flinched. A nervous titter escaped him, a sound that was both wet and reedy. "Oh, Governor Thorn, surely you jest?" he stammered, attempting to inject an air of bravado into his voice, but it faltered into a high-pitched falsetto. "What lessons? It is merely a turn of phrase, a domestic matter, you understand. Familial trifles." He took a tentative step forward, seeking to intercept the governor's line of sight, but a guard's shoulder effectively barred his progress. "My mother is unwell. You comprehend? The toll of age. She becomes disoriented, forgets her surroundings. Her coordination has faltered." He tapped his temple with a finger, a gesture that churned bile in my throat. He was fabricating a convincing narrative. Javisha nodded beside him, her movements like those of a bobblehead doll, lending credence to her husband's fabrication. "And she fell down the stairs," Tavarius blurted out, gratefully seizing upon this fabricated scenario. "Precisely. She stumbled on the steps, the poor dear. We were terribly alarmed. We intended to summon an ambulance immediately, but she refused. She insisted, 'No need, it will pass.' We are attending to her with the utmost care, Governor. She is treated like royalty." He paused, then added, "And the cast, well, these things happen. Old bones are fragile." A heavy silence descended upon the room. Tavarius offered a strained smile, dabbing at his forehead. Undoubtedly, his fabrication possessed a certain plausibility. After all, it was a common enough scenario. An elderly woman, stairs, a fall. Who would scrutinize it further? I swallowed the last fragment of meat. The ache in my arm persisted, yet with a renewed supply of glucose fueling my brain, my thoughts sharpened to a crystalline clarity. I turned my gaze to my son-in-law, this diminutive man who presumed himself the arbiter of life's affairs. "Tavarius," I stated. My voice resonated with newfound strength. He twitched, casting a venomous glance my way, an implicit command to remain silent. "What is it, mother?" he hissed through clenched teeth, desperately attempting to maintain the facade of a concerned relative. "Would you like some more water?" "There are no stairs in this residence," I declared, enunciating each word with deliberate precision. "We occupy a single level. There is not a solitary step within these premises. Even the thresholds have been removed to facilitate my mobility." The ensuing silence was absolute, deafening. Tavarius's smile dissolved like melting slush. He froze, his mouth agape, realizing the profound foolishness of his recently uttered falsehood. In his panic, he had forgotten the very architecture of his own home, the very property he was so eager to divest. Governor Thorn ceased twirling the glass of water he held. Slowly, his gaze rose to meet Tavarius's. His expression darkened, becoming as menacing as the muzzle of a firearm. "No stairs?" the governor inquired, his voice a low murmur. Tavarius began to stammer. "Well, I meant figuratively, perhaps in the building's corridor, or perhaps I misspoke. The stress, Governor. I am so concerned about Mother." The governor rose deliberately. He was a full head taller than Tavarius. He advanced directly towards him, encroaching upon his personal space, forcing my son-in-law to press backward against the ornate china cabinet. Misleading a public official is a misdemeanor, Tavarius, Cassius stated, his gaze locked onto my son-in-law's pupils. Lying during an investigation is a felony. He allowed a beat to pass, letting his words sink into Tavarius's consciousness. But deceiving the woman who pulled me back from the brink 30 years ago, the governor's voice dropped to a chilling whisper that sent a shiver through the assembled guests. That, my son, is a sin, and I am a man who fears God. He abruptly turned away from the trembling Tavarius and directed his attention back to me. Javisha, I commanded, affording Tavarius no opportunity to recover his composure. Fetch my bag. My daughter flinched at the sound of her name. But mother, why? She squeaked. Fetch the bag immediately. Havicha, stumbling slightly, hurried to the hallway and returned with my well-worn satchel. I gestured towards it for the governor. Please, Cassius, I requested, using the name I had first addressed him by in the hospital ward that evening. Open the inner pocket. There is something within that will illuminate the nature of these so-called stairs. Cassius froze. His hand hovered above the zipper of my bag, but he did not open it. At that precise moment, Tavarius, sensing that his silence was drawing him inexorably downwards, decided to commit to a full-fledged gambit. He straightened his shoulders, attempting to project an air of commanding authority, an attitude that had previously proven remarkably effective with his subordinates and petitioners. Governor Thorne, one moment, he declared, his voice acquiring a strained yet audacious firmness. Let us engage in a straightforward discussion, man to man, official to official. He took a step forward, disregarding the tense guard, and spread his hands expansively, as if inviting the governor into his circle of influence. I am the Deputy Director of Housing, Tavarius proclaimed, pronouncing his title with the gravitas of a high-ranking general. We are in essence in the same predicament, Governor. We govern this city, this state. You understand the pressures, the constant stress, the responsibility. He gestured dismissively in my direction, as if brushing away an insignificant speck of dust. Here, we are confronting a familial crisis. Ms. Oilia, regrettably, is succumbing to the ravages of age. Her mental faculties are declining. Dementia, a most unfortunate affliction. Javisha, catching the subtle shift in her husband's tone, immediately aligned herself with his strategy. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, tears not of remorse, but of apprehension for her own comfort. Indeed, she becomes aggressive towards us, my daughter cried out, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. You cannot fathom, Governor, the daily ordeal of sharing a domicile with her. She exhibits violent tendencies. Yesterday, she hurled a vase at Tavarius. We were merely defending ourselves. That arm, she gestured towards my injured limb. I attempted to restrain her, to prevent her from harming herself or us. I listened to their carefully constructed narrative, experiencing a peculiar sensation of emptiness. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, standing there slandering her mother to shield the reputation of her undeserving husband. Yet, in place of pain, I felt only the cold analytical clarity of a diagnostician observing the progression of a gangrenous infection. Cassius did not avert his gaze from them. He looked directly at me, patiently awaiting my response. He required no excuses. He sought the truth. Havisha, I said, my voice quiet. The room was so utterly still that the rustle of fabric seemed amplified. Retrieve the envelope from my bag, the one you observed this morning, but were too apprehensive to touch. Jisha froze. Her hand hovered in mid-air. She darted a fearful glance towards her husband, seeking his support. However, Tavarius was entirely engrossed in an attempt to bore a hole through the floor with his intense stare. "Do as your mother instructs." Cassius's voice cracked like a whip. He extended the satchel towards her. With trembling fingers, Havisha unfastened it. She fumbled inside and extracted a large canary yellow envelope fashioned from substantial paper. The sound of its removal echoed with deafening loudness in the prevailing silence. "What is that?" Tavarius blustered, a nervous laugh escaping him, though a considerable drop of sweat trickled down his temple. "A note from the psychiatric ward, proof of her delusion. Hand it over." Cassius snatched the envelope from Havisha's inert grasp. He did not tear it open. Instead, he carefully withdrew its contents, a black and grey sheet of X-ray film. A light box was unnecessary. Cassius held the film aloft, positioning it directly beneath the glittering crystal chandelier. The light refracted through the myriad facets of the crystals, bathing the film and revealing to everyone present the stark, whitish geometry of my bones against the deep black background. The fracture was clearly discernible, a jagged, unsightly line bisecting the radius bone. Tavarius emitted a dismissive snort, attempting to salvage some semblance of credibility. "Well, you see," he scoffed, "she fell precisely as I stated. Typical fall trauma." Cassius slowly lowered the image. He now regarded Tavarius not as an official, nor even as a fellow human being. He looked at him as a target. "I served 2 combat tours in the desert, Tavarius," the governor stated, his voice imbued with the chilling finality of the grave. "I have witnessed men fall from trucks, from rooftops, from precipices. When a person falls, their natural instinct is to extend their hands forward, palms down. The bone fractures at the wrist due to compression, resulting in a break." He tapped the film with a single finger, directly over the point of the fracture, located in the middle third of the forearm. "However," Cassius continued, taking a step towards Tavarius, causing the man to press further against the china cabinet, rattling its fragile contents. "This is a diaphyseal fracture of the radius. It occurs under only one specific circumstance, when an individual instinctively raises their arm to shield their head from an impending blow from above. A blow delivered by a pipe, a bat, or indeed a very substantial fist." Tavarius's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His carefully constructed lie disintegrated into dust, obliterated by the stark, brutal anatomy of violence. "This is a defensive fracture," Cassius declared, tossing the X-ray onto the table, its landing directly within the bowl of potato salad. "She did not fall. She was defending herself." He sharply turned his head to his left, where his head of security, a tall, impassive man, stood at attention. "Major," the governor commanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation, "contact the district attorney. I require a comprehensive audit of the deputy director's activities, every contract, every signature, every taxpayer dollar allocated over the past 5 years. Commence with his personal accounts." "Yes, sir," the major replied crisply, reaching for his radio. "When shall we initiate the proceedings?" Cassius's gaze fixed on Tavarius, who was now sliding down the wall, clutching his chest. 5 minutes ago." The pronouncement of 5 minutes ago hung in the air, much like the scent of ozone after a violent lightning strike. For Tavarius, it signified the unequivocal end. I witnessed the dawning comprehension pierce through the fog of his intoxication. An audit, an examination of his financial dealings. This was not merely a matter of dismissal. This was the complete and utter collapse of the elaborate house of cards he had meticulously constructed over years of bribes, kickbacks, and petty larceny. Instead of succumbing, he erupted. It was the primal reaction of a cornered animal, whose escape routes had been irrevocably severed. His face flushed a violent shade of purple. The veins on his neck bulged grotesquely, transforming into thick, unsightly cords. "You have no right," he bellowed, spittle flying onto the gleaming, polished table. "You cannot do this to me. Who do you believe you are? Just because you are the governor, you think you can dictate whatever you please?" He slammed his fist onto the table, causing the plates to jump precariously. The guests recoiled further into their chairs, their eyes fixed on the walls, as if wishing to dissolve into the very wallpaper. "This is my home!" Tavarius roared, all semblance of humanity vanishing. "My condominium, I am the master here. And she," he jabbed a trembling finger in my direction, "she is a nobody, a dependent. I provide for her. I pay for her utilities. I tolerate her senility. I have rights, constitutional rights." The raw fear of incarceration consumed the last vestiges of his reason. Alcohol and sheer panic had fused into a dangerously combustible mixture. And Tavarius, forgetting the presence of armed security, forgetting who stood before him, lunged forward. His vision narrowed, seeing only me, the perceived architect of his impending downfall. He intended to reach me, perhaps to strike me again, to silence me, to annihilate the witness to his ignominious collapse. "This is all your fault, you old hag," he rasped, rounding the corner of the table. Jevisha, covering her face with her hands, let out a thin, piercing shriek. The guards tensed. I saw the major's hand slide discreetly towards the holster concealed beneath his jacket. It was a practiced, fluid, lethal motion. However, they had neither the time nor the necessity to take a step. Cassius Thorne simply stood. He made no abrupt movements, his voice remained even. He merely ascended to his full, considerable height, squaring the broad shoulders beneath his impeccably tailored grey wool suit. He positioned himself between me and the rampaging Tavarius, transforming into an unyielding barrier. A palpable wave of immense, crushing power emanated from him, rendering the very air around us dense and heavy. Tavarius collided with this formidable presence and recoiled as if he had struck solid concrete. He halted a mere half-step from the governor, breathing heavily, his fists clenched, yet he dared not raise them. Cases's eyes descended upon him with the icy calm of an executioner, the axe already raised, awaiting the final command. "Sit," Cassius stated quietly. It was not a request, it was a command issued to a canine. Tavarius began to tremble violently. All his bluster dissipated, shattered against the granite composure of my guest. He stepped back, tripped over the leg of a chair, and sank heavily to the floor, landing directly upon the polished hardwood, his fingers clenching the edge of the tablecloth. A ringing silence descended upon the room, broken only by the ragged breaths of my son-in-law and the soft sobs of Havisha. I slowly regained my composure. My heart began to beat with a steady rhythm. Now that the immediate threat of physical violence had receded, it was time for a different kind of confrontation, for the truth. "Your residence?" I inquired. My voice was quiet, yet in the profound silence it resonated with the force of a scream. Tavarius lifted his clouded gaze to meet mine. "Yes," he spat, still clinging to his deluded fantasies. "Legally mine, Javicia is the sole inheritor. As soon as you are gone, this will all be ours. I've already spoken with the real estate agents. I need that capital." Cassius, I did not look at my son-in-law. My gaze remained fixed on the governor. "Kindly pass me the crimson folder," I requested. "The one I asked you to retrieve from the archives." Cassius nodded. He extended his hand to his aide, who, without question, placed a thin cardboard folder bearing the city seal into his palm. The governor positioned it before me on the table, adjacent to my empty glass. With my left hand I opened the folder. Within lay a single document, its paper bearing watermarks, yellowed by over 10 years of existence, yet retaining an unyielding strength. Tavarius, I announced, turning the document so that the header was clearly visible to him. You assaulted me, demanding I sign over the deed. You threatened me. You humiliated me. You deliberately starved me to force me into this apartment. You screamed that you would sell it to settle your debts. I paused, allowing him the opportunity to absorb the full weight of each word. But you made one crucial error, a mistake typical of an amateur. You neglected to verify the property registry. You were so convinced I was merely a senile old woman clinging to my surroundings that you failed to even initiate a title search. Tavarius craned his neck, attempting to decipher the text on the paper. His eyes narrowed, struggling to focus on the lettering. "What is that?" he rasped. "This," I stated, a faint smile gracing my lips, "is a deed of gift, dated 2014, 10 years ago, to Tavarius." I placed my good hand upon the document. "I gifted this condominium to the City Hospital Board, in remembrance of my husband and my career. The contract contains but one encumbrance clause, the lifetime residency rights for Miss Oilia Vance." Javisha ceased her crying. She lifted her head, her mouth falling open in silent astonishment. "Mother," she whispered, "you gave the condo to the hospital?" "Yes," I replied, my gaze never leaving Tavarius's ashen face. "This residence does not belong to me, nor does it belong to Javisha, and most assuredly, Tavarius, it has never belonged to you." I watched as the full implication of my words dawned upon him, as his last vestiges of hope for escaping his creditors crumbled into dust. He had not merely committed a crime, he had committed a pointless one. "You physically harmed me for a piece of paper that holds no value," I concluded, closing the folder. "You fought for a phantom. There is nothing here for you but your outstanding debts." Tavarius emitted a sound akin to a beaten dog, a low whimper. He covered his face with his hands and rocked back and forth, sitting on the floor of the state's dining room. He realized he hadn't lost tonight. He had lost 10 years ago, the moment he decided I was merely a resource to be exploited. The moan that escaped Tavarius's throat bore no resemblance to human speech. It was the sound of a snapped string, the agonizing cry of a collapsing bridge support. He looked at the crimson folder as if it were radioactive. His world, constructed upon avarice and the certainty that the vulnerable could be plundered with impunity, had imploded into a single, desolate black dot. Suddenly he moved, but not to attack. All his arrogance, all his inflated self-importance evaporated, leaving only a sticky, primal fear. Tavarius slid completely from his seated position onto the floor, transforming into a shapeless mass of expensive fabric and clammy flesh. He crawled towards me on all fours, his fingers scrabbling at the legs of my chair. His digits slid across the wood, leaving wet streaks in their wake. He attempted to reach the hem of my dress, to kiss it, but I recoiled, pulling my feet back in sheer disgust. "Mazilia, mother!" he whined, tears mingling with snot streaming down his crimson face. "Forgive me, for God's sake, forgive me. I didn't know, I truly didn't know. It's all the strain, it's the job. You understand what my job entails?" He raised his terror-stricken eyes to mine. "They will kill me, mother," he whispered, his voice breaking. "The people to whom I owe money. If I cannot pay them tomorrow, they will dismember me. I do not have the funds. I had hoped, I thought. Mother, save me. Plead with Governor Thorne. Ask him to grant me an extension. Let him assist me. I will work tirelessly to repay everything. I will wash your feet." The spectacle was utterly revolting. The man who, barely an hour earlier, had referred to me as a senile old woman and revelled in my pain, was now grovelling at my feet, prepared to lick my shoes. I gazed at the crown of his head, at his thinning hair matted with perspiration, and felt nothing but a profound nausea, as if I had inadvertently stepped in mud. "It wasn't me," he suddenly shrieked, desperately seeking a scapegoat. "It's all her, it's Javisha." He jabbed a finger backward towards his wife without turning his head. "She instigated it. She said, 'Mother is old. She doesn't need the apartment. Let's sell it. Let's invest.' She wanted money for a new vehicle. I merely desired domestic tranquility." He pleaded, "Mother, believe me, I wanted peace in the family." Something clattered loudly in the room. Havisha had dropped her fork. I shifted my gaze to my daughter. She sat there, pale as a ghost, her hands pressed to her chest. Upon hearing her husband's words, witnessing his desperate attempt to drag her down with his sinking ship, she underwent a transformation. The fear in her eyes was supplanted by the unbridled fury of a cornered creature. She sprang from her chair, knocking it over with a resounding crash. "What are you saying, you animal?" she screamed, her voice fracturing into a high-pitched squeal. "How dare you? You forced me." Jisha lunged towards me, her arms flailing through the air like a swimmer. She fell to her knees beside Tavarius, shoving him with her shoulder, her sole objective to reach me, to get closer to the source of salvation. "Mother, do not listen to him," she babbled, grasping my good hand. Her palms felt icy and clammy. "He is a monster, a tyrant. I was terrified of him. He not only threatened you, he menaced me. I intended to call 911. Mother, I swear." I reached for the phone, but he ripped the cord out. I cried all night. I wanted to help you, but he threatened to kill us both. Her sobs turned her face into a warped canvas of despair, mascara blurring into streaks across her cheeks. "Mama, I am your daughter, your little girl. I love you. Please help me escape him. Inform Governor Thorne that I am a victim." I observed them both, two broken figures humbled at my feet. One a stranger motivated solely by greed. The other, the one I had nurtured within me, whom I had fed and whose childish hurts I had soothed. How had we arrived at this precipice? When had my cherished child, my personal project, devolved into this? I gently, yet resolutely, withdrew my hand from her desperate grip. The ache in my fractured bone served as a stark reminder of reality, preventing any descent into maudlin sentimentality. "Chvitzia," I stated softly. She stilled, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in her eyes as she watched my lips, anticipating absolution, expecting a mother's heart to soften. "You are fabricating," I declared. Bewilderment clouded her features. "Mama, you didn't want to summon the physician." I cut her off, my voice now possessing a sharpness akin to a scalpel slicing through flesh. Every moment of that night is etched in my memory. I lay on the hallway floor, writhing in agony. Tavarius was in the kitchen fetching water. "And you?" I leaned closer, my gaze fixed on her wide, unblinking pupils. "You stood above me. You shed no tears. You bent down and spat into my face. 'Silence, you old fool. Be quiet, the neighbors will hear. You're humiliating us.'" Havisha recoiled as if struck. Her mouth parted, but the words remained trapped. A flush of shame did not color her cheeks. Instead, she grew even paler. The realization dawned. I remembered. I had been lucid. The witness to her perfidy was not some divine entity, but me. "Your fear was not for my well-being," I continued, my words relentless. "You feared a scandal. You dreaded the police being called by neighbors, which would damage Tavarius's career, and consequently your privileged existence. You prioritized your comfort, Havisha, not your mother." She lowered her head, utterly devoid of defense. At that instant, a sharp, abrupt vibration emanated from the polished tabletop. Everyone flinched, save for Governor Thorne. The governor calmly retrieved a smartphone from his inner jacket pocket. The screen's cool blue luminescence reflected in his impassive eyes. He swiped the display, perusing a message. The corner of his mouth twitched upwards almost imperceptibly. This was not a smile of happiness, but the grim satisfaction of a surgeon confirming a dire prognosis. The audit progresses with remarkable speed, he remarked dryly, his eyes still on the device. In this day and age, digital traces are far more indelible than bloodstains. He set the phone down deliberately and addressed Tavarius, who had fallen silent, sensing an inevitable downfall. It appears, Tavarius, that your financial woes are merely the surface of a much larger problem. The governor's tone was almost listless, yet imbued with an undercurrent of menace. My associates have scrutinized more than just your bank accounts. They have examined the properties under your purview, including the subterranean level of this very edifice, a structure designated as a historical landmark. Tavarius ceased breathing. His eyes bulged. The mention of the basement seemed to petrify him more than his mother-in-law's broken arm. An intriguing situation, Cassius commented, tapping a finger on the table. Legally, it's designated for janitorial supplies, but in reality, my team is currently on site. They report sufficient quantity of illicitly obtained merchandise to establish a small black market. Counterfeit designer handbags, untaxed cigarettes, the fencing of stolen property. Tavarius. The governor shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. You did not merely assault a retired surgeon. You utilized the basement of the building where the woman who saved my life resides as a repository for your clandestine operations. You transformed her home into a den of iniquity. Cassius then directed his gaze to the head of security. Major. The officer acknowledged with a nod, requiring no further direction. 2 guards advanced, moving with the synchronized precision of a single mechanism. Tavarius had no opportunity to cry out. Powerful hands encased in black gloves hoisted him from his knees. He struggled futilely, but they secured his wrists with such expert force that joints popped audibly. No, Governor Thorne, we can resolve this, Tavarius pleaded, writhing within their unyielding grasp. I will cooperate. I will reveal the suppliers. Don't discard the refuse, the governor stated quietly, turning towards the window. The guards propelled Tavarius towards the exit, showing no deference. His feet scraped against the polished floorboards, disturbing the rugs. His screams, his pleas, his threats dissolved into mere background noise. The hallway door stood open, the same portal he had so confidently flung wide minutes prior, anticipating an accomplice. Now he was being dragged through it like the criminal he truly was, his suit brushing against the frame just before it slammed shut. Shavisha, do something, his final desperate wail echoed from the foyer. Then the heavy oak front door closed with a definitive thud, a sound as conclusive as a judge's verdict. Silence descended once more upon the apartment, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock and Havisha's ragged breaths as she remained seated on the floor, utterly alone amidst the wreckage of her existence. Her gaze was not directed at me, but fixed upon the empty space where her husband had stood moments before, the dawning realization that she was next. Javisha! The governor's voice pierced the void left by the departing security detail. My daughter flinched, still crouched on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes locked on a single point. The very spot where her comfortable life, meticulously constructed on falsehoods and my protracted forbearance, had crumbled. You cannot remain here tonight, Cassius stated, his tone devoid of emotion, a mere factual pronouncement, like a physician issuing a quarantine order. A criminal investigation has been initiated against your husband. You are currently considered a witness, but given your tacit complicity in the operation of a receiving business from the basement, investigators will have numerous questions for you." Havisha slowly lifted her gaze to meet mine. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a vacant stare, stripped of all pretense of concern. "Where am I to go?" she inquired softly, her voice childlike. "Pack what you require," Cassius replied without looking at her. "Take only the essentials. My driver will transport you to a hotel. While the inquiry is ongoing, you are expressly prohibited from approaching Ms. Oilia." Havisha offered no protest, no pleas. She rose unsteadily from the floor, her stiff legs protesting as she stumbled towards her room. 10 minutes later, she emerged, a small duffel bag in hand. She paused in the doorway of the dining room, her gaze meeting mine. I observed her lips tremble. She seemed on the verge of speaking, perhaps to bid farewell or perhaps to renew her accusations. Yet she remained silent, and so did I. Sometimes a wound must remain open to allow for its own purification. The front door clicked shut softly this time. The apartment was enveloped in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the oppressive, suffocating stillness that had permeated these rooms for years. It was a clean, crisp stillness, reminiscent of an operating theatre post-successful, arduous surgery, when the lights dim and the patient is moved to recovery. Life has been preserved. The worst has passed. Cassius's assistants worked with efficient, quiet movements. While we spoke, they cleared away the remnants of the lavish meal, the discarded dishes, the spilled wine. They threw open the windows, allowing the fresh night air to sweep through, dissipating the stale scent of liquor and Tavarius's cloying cologne. We were left alone, myself and the young man I had once rescued. Now a distinguished gentleman, burdened with the responsibilities of the state. We sat at a meticulously cleared table. Before us only 2 delicate porcelain cups, their contents emitting wisps of steam, and a saucer bearing thinly sliced lemon. The tea was robust, authentic, a rich amber hue. My right arm, encased in plaster, rested on my lap. The pain medication was waning, and the dull, persistent ache returned, a reminder of the evening's considerable cost. Yet this pain felt different. It was the discomfort of healing, not the agony of devastation. I experienced an extraordinary sense of lightness, as if a heavy lead apron I had worn for years had finally been removed from my shoulders. Cassius took a sip of tea and peered at me over the rim of his cup. "Miss Oilia," he inquired gently, "do you require anything further? I can arrange for a nurse or facilitate your transfer to the premier suite at the General Hospital. We can provide financial assistance, medical care, security. Simply name your need." I met his gaze. In his eyes I detected an unfeigned willingness to reshape the world for my benefit. But my need was not for the world. It was for the recovery of myself. I shifted my attention to the center of the table. There, on a small plate, lay the sole untouched item from the ostentatious feast. A slice of red velvet cake, its layers a deep crimson, adorned with a thick swirl of cream cheese frosting. It stood as a miniature monument. Beside it rested a silver dessert fork. "Just one thing, Cassius," I said, a genuine smile gracing my lips for the first time that evening. The governor tensed slightly, prepared to accommodate any request. "The fork," I stated. He blinked, visibly perplexed. "The fork?" he asked, glancing around the table. "Shall I serve you? I'll fetch—" "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "Simply slide it closer to me." Cassius, still puzzled, carefully nudged the saucer bearing the cake and the fork towards my edge of the table. I looked down at my right arm, immobilized in its plaster cast, the very limb Tavarius had mocked. declaring me incapable of even feeding myself. Slowly, with deliberate concentration, I lifted my left hand, my non-dominant hand. My fingers trembled slightly, a testament to age and stress, but I compelled them to obey. I picked up the silver fork. It felt alien, awkward, yet held firmly in my palm. Tavarius said I couldn't hold it, I murmured quietly, my eyes fixed on the gleaming silver. That I was helpless, that without him I would starve with a full plate. I met Cassius's gaze. I need to prove him wrong, even if he never witnesses it. I need to prove it to myself. With my left hand, I lowered the fork into the cake. Awkwardly, but with unwavering resolve, I broke off a piece and lifted it to my mouth. The frosting was sweet. The cake melted on my tongue. It was the most exquisite cake I had ever tasted, for I was consuming it myself, within my own home at my own table, free from fear. I am not helpless, Cassius, I declared, swallowing the mouthful and feeling a surge of renewed strength. I am a surgeon. I was merely awaiting the opportune moment for the procedure. I set the fork down and gazed out the darkened window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Sometimes, I continued, for the organism to survive, the infected part must be amputated even if it causes pain, even if it is family. I was simply waiting for the appropriate assistant to excise the rot. Governor Thorne silently covered my functional hand with his own. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking our tea, the clock marking the passage of time in my newly liberated life. Tick-tock, tick-tock. My dear listeners, this concludes the narrative of Oilia Vance, a chronicle of a strong woman's enduring spirit and the profound retribution that follows when her reservoir of patience is irrevocably depleted. I understand that many of you may harbor conflicting emotions. Some will likely feel they deserved every bit of it. Others might ponder, wasn't it excessively severe? After all, Hevisha is her own flesh and blood. Is it justifiable to cast aside one's child into uncertainty while consigning one's son-in-law to incarceration? This presents an enduring dilemma. Where does familial obligation cease and the right to personal dignity commence? Does a parent possess the prerogative to sever ties with offspring who have transformed into detrimental parasites threatening their very existence? I, Oilia, made my choice. I chose life. Did you find this story compelling? And from which city are you tuning in? Let's engage in the comments section. If you enjoyed this narrative, your support through a super thanks would be immensely appreciated, enabling me to continue bringing you more such stories. Thank you wholeheartedly for your generous contributions. I eagerly anticipate your feedback on this tale. On your screen now, you will find 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. My channel is replete with further compelling content. Please remember to subscribe. Until our next life story, with warmth and profound respect,